for joining us here today for breaking down House Bill 1. How would the Florida House's voucher expansion bill impact public education funding? My name is Sonia Lindell, and I'm the Director of Communications at Florida Policy Institute. Before we begin, just a few quick notes. We will be taking questions through the Q&A after the presenters have gone. This presentation is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the recording and the slide deck later today. Our speakers today are Noreen Dollard, Senior Policy Analyst and Kids Count Director at Florida Policy Institute, and Mary McKillop, who is Senior Researcher at Education Law Center. I'm going to hand it over to Noreen.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining. As Sonia said, I'm Noreen Dollard. I'm Senior Policy Analyst and Kids Count Director in Florida. I'm with the Florida Policy Institute, and our focus is tax and revenue policy and how that affects everyday Floridians. And our mission is to ensure opportunity for every Floridian. And I'll let my colleague, Dr. Mary McKillop, introduce herself in the Education Law Center.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm Mary McKillop. Like Noreen said, I'm a senior researcher at the Education Law Center, which is a nonprofit based in Newark, New Jersey, that is focused on state-based efforts to improve school funding equity and to secure resources needed for students to have the opportunity to learn. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So I just wanted to start with a little very brief introduction to Florida's vouchers. We have three different kinds in Florida: family empowerment scholarships for educational options. These funds are paid they're paid directly to private schools for tuition. These are also known as traditional private school vouchers. The family empowerment scholarships for student abilities are what are known as educational savings account, and parents can use these funds to pay for approved educational uses, tuition, therapy, to help their student be successful. And then the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship, which has similar eligibility to the Family Empowerment Scholarship educational option, and payments are made directly to private schools, tax credit scholarships. And we finished a report in the fall at the Ed Law Center and Florida Policy Institute on vouchers, and we will put that link in the chat a bit later. So currently, folks who are eligible for the Family Empowerment Scholarship educational options are students with families earning up to 375% of the federal poverty level. That's $112,000, more than $112,000 for a family of four presently. The Family Empowerment Scholarship for students with unique abilities. Students with disabilities are eligible regardless of their incomes. How are these scholarships funded? They are funded with state education funds coming from general revenue, and they're calculated according to a formula called the Florida Education Finance Program. And the formula accounts for various things like smaller versus larger counties, number of students with disabilities, and different things to try to equalize the funding across all of Florida's school districts. The scholarships are a base amount allocated to school districts, public schools, on a per pupil basis. And this is, again, the formula plus additional funds for for things like special needs and rurality and things like that. And so this base amount is redirected to private schools from the funds allocated to school districts. At the final calculation of the Florida Education Finance Program, the expenditures averaged $8,515, and this amount for each student who received a voucher was directed from school district budgets to the voucher program. The new House Bill 1 would expand eligibility for the Family Empowerment Scholarships for educational options to any student, any resident of Florida who is eligible to attend a public school kindergarten through 12th grade. There would be no income cap on eligibility. There are no eligibility for the Family Empowerment Scholarship for students with unique abilities, although the cap on growth is increased to 3% of the state's exceptional student education. So those are students with disability. So it's 3% of that total population. Students currently in private schools would be eligible for vouchers regardless of whether they had previously attended public schools. Children who are homeschooled would also be eligible for vouchers. And the bill would also convert all of the Family Empowerment Scholarships to educational savings accounts. So essentially, they're written a check, and parents, just spend that money with approval, but spend it for educational expenses, including tuition, but not limited by any means. I am going to turn it over to Mary to talk a little bit about the population and its growth.
Thanks, Noreen. And I'm going to now throw a lot of numbers around. So definitely, if we will have information posted with more details on these estimates and how we got there on the Florida Policy Institute website, as well as Education Law Center, and we should be able to get that information out, and absolutely happy to answer questions afterwards. I think we lost the slides here. Okay. So this first slide we're looking at numbers of students. So we calculated the cost of HB1 in the first year by considering who would be eligible for vouchers with this legislation and estimating the cost for those current voucher students and additional voucher students. So the first group on the left there are the current voucher students, 124,000, costing $1.1 billion in school district state aid in 2021-22. This is the number that we're focusing on for these estimates. We use 2021-22 dollars because that is where we could get the most detailed information. But the latest estimates for the current school year put the amount up to 1.4 billion. So this is a conservative estimate. The second group of students are public school students in Florida. With HB1 removing income restrictions, we calculated the number of students who would fall in that higher income group who weren't eligible prior, and assumed a 12% participation rate because that is about the rate of the current students with the income eligibility cap currently. So that would be about 890 million for about 105,000 of those 2.7 million students, because with the higher income restriction students, there are also the students who used to be eligible in public school are still eligible. So of course they could also decide to participate as well. The third group of students here are private school students who are not currently using the FES voucher. That's 292,000. So using this number, we assumed a 75% participation rate based on the trends currently in Arizona with their universal voucher program opening. And with the thought that there's really little incentive for families whose children are already attending private school to not apply for the government to fund instead of having to pay the tuition themselves, as well as Noreen, these funds can be used for things other than tuition. So families could apply for this to apply it to their private education for their students to pay for other supplemental resources. So we're estimating a cost here for about 219,000 students in the first year at $1.9 billion. The fourth group of students are the homeschooled students. Right now, there are about 150,000 students in the state being homeschooled. The legislation puts a cap in the first year of $10,000 10,000 students who can access this voucher in the first year. So the cost would be about 85 million. However, this 10,000 student cap is relaxed in the second year and then is completely removed by 2027. So any of these 152,000 students could access the vouchers, and more families could decide that if they can be funded for it, that they may decide to home educate their children as well. So this number could rise. So altogether, the estimates that we're looking at are about 458,000 students in the first year. Next slide, please. Thanks. So with those students, that puts the total cost for the Florida Empowerment Scholarship in the first year with HB1 at $4 billion in state aid. This is much higher than the already substantial cost of vouchers with the current program over $1 billion. And if you weren't aware that Florida is already redirecting more than $1 billion in public school district state aid to private education, that is the piece that Noreen and I recently put out that you can find on the Florida Policy Institute website, or we can put in the chat here that that goes into detail about the current recent expansion that already happened, that this would expand even further. I do want to note that this $4 billion does not include the cost of the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Voucher Program, which sent $568 million to private education in 2021-22. So that would be a separate expense. Next slide. So as Noreen noted, the FES vouchers are funded by rerouting state education funds from a student's residential school district to cover the voucher cost. So students who are already receiving private education, whether private school or being homeschooled, are not included in the district enrollment totals to calculate state aid. So that means that based on these estimates, there's $2 billion in new state funding that would be needed to fund the vouchers for these students who are not currently enrolled in public schools. If new revenue is not found to cover these costs, the public school districts will end up with significantly less revenue to fund the remaining public school students, which we're estimating would be a drop in state aid per pupil of over $900. So all of this information, that was the state overview, but we were able to get all of these numbers at the district level. So we do have a view that, Noreen, if you can take us there. And if we can access it, we'll put it in the chat too, so that if you want to check out your district, I can show it here, but you can also access it yourselves to see the different districts, because districts are estimated to be more or less impacted depending on the size of their public, private, and homeschool student populations. So this view here is Lee County School District.
But you can.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. And so this is Lee. Carry on. It is in the chat, and I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Lee is estimated to see a loss of $88 million in state aid for an estimated 10,341 voucher students in the first year of HB1 implementation. Because many of these new students would be their current private school student population, the state aid amount would be estimated to drop 641 per pupil in the first year, from 3,376 per pupil to 2,735 per pupil. And this is available at all the districts. Some it's taking a larger chunk of their state aid, and some not as much, depending on their populations.
Yeah, and you'll see that you can be able, if you follow the link, you can check whatever districts that you want to find out how that affects your particular school district.
Noreen, I'll let you take it from here.
Unmute. Okay. So why does it matter? It matters because we already spend this year 1.3 billion public school dollars being diverted to private schools from school district budgets. And much of these funds are taken out after school budgets are already formulated and implemented. So the school districts don't have control over the front door, and they don't control, so they are left trying to scramble to make up for funds because they aren't unable to plan in advance for the number of vouchers. As we noted, the revised estimates project an annual cost in excess of $4 billion. And that's just for next year. And we anticipate we were as conservative as we could possibly be in these calculations. So we expect it to be higher. There is no funding identified to support the expansion of the responsibilities of public schools to serve more students or pay for the private school vouchers. And so there's no funding source. So it has to come from somewhere, which is of great concern. It's already 10% of the K through 12 funding this year, if I'm not mistaken, but you can check it in our report. Under HB1, the number of students receiving vouchers would form a school district larger than Hillsborough County, where Tampa is, both in the number of students and the needed budget in order to provide the vouchers. And Hillsborough is one of the largest school districts in the nation. So we're going to stop there. And if you want to follow up, we're going to take questions now, but also for future reference, if you have questions, you can direct them to our communications and marketing director, Sonia Lindell.
Great. Thank you both so much. And there are already a few questions in the queue here, so we will get through as many as we can. First question, will individual school districts have a role as a pass-through entity?
For most of the vouchers, yes, definitely for existing students. They will.
So, well, and the way the funding works is the state aid is calculated of how much is sent to the district, and then it's redirected to the voucher program and pulled out of what would be sent to the district. So it never actually, the funds are allocated to the district, but they never actually get sent to the district and then get resent. It's just in the budget. They're saying, oh, you're going to get X amount of money. And then instead the state says, no, but part of it we're keeping to send to the voucher program and not sending you. And if you look at our earlier report, we show how like the budget over the course of a school year changes. And so districts sometimes, what we saw in the report was that over the course of the school year, more and more funds were held back than was initially allocated to the school district. And so there was sort of at the end of the school year, the district ended up getting much less than they thought they were getting at the beginning of the school year. So it's not like the money doesn't land in the district's hands and then they pass it on. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is about concerns around equitable access for disabled children. The childcare sector right now is similar to a public-private partnership, similar to a voucher system. And what we have found over the last decade is that disabled children have over time less and less access because private centers will discriminate against disabled children because of the cost of care and education in favor of non-disabled children who are seen as having a lesser cost of care. Are there strong guardrails in place currently to prevent that over time? I worry that the current voucher system benefiting these families being essentially useless if they can't get slots or if there are no caps on increasing tuition.
The change in HB1 does not confer any more safeguards for students. And the bill, in fact, pretty explicitly says, reminding us that the guarantees to free and appropriate public education are not, that's not incumbent on the private schools. So no, it does not provide additional protection at present.
Great, thank you. Has there been any discussion of expanding HB1 to early learning?
I have not heard that.
What are the other resources apart from education that families can use the vouchers to pay for?
I believe all of the funding needs to be used for educational purposes, but it's not required to be used for tuition. So in the legislation, there's a variety of other education costs that can be used.
Right. So it could be therapy, it could be, oops, hold on a second, because I have it. It could be therapy, it could be tutoring, taking, sitting for like AP exams and higher ed as well. Students are even able to enroll in public school or charter school courses on a part-time basis, and the school district would receive, what they would contract with the school district to, say, take AP or something like that. It's pretty generous, and it's or wide-reaching in the eligible expenses that can be that the funds can be used for. It can even be put in college savings, so that's not prohibited in this legislation.
There's a question about sharing this information with school board members who applaud HB1 for its opportunities for parental choice. And we have, made these materials available and accessible both on Florida Policy Institute's website and on Education Law Center's site, so that hopefully there will be a lot of eyes on these fiscal impact estimates.
And we would definitely encourage you to have that conversation with your school board members, with your legislators. The bill's already had its first hearing in the House. And so this is definitely the time to have those frank conversations with your elected officials.
Given this large impact, has any study been done on how many local schools would close and what would happen to that property?
Wow.
Yeah, that's not a focus of our report, no.
But I do think Arizona, and there are a couple other states that are doing these universal vouchers as well. So it is, Arizona is leading the charge right now. So watching and what impact it is having on them will certainly give us a sense of what's going to happen in Florida. They've only been running with this for 4 months, and it's having a tremendous impact on their state budget in a way that no one thought. And so this is it's really important. And anyone saying that this won't impact the public school districts themselves, like when you have all these students who are currently not on the rolls of public school districts, and you're suddenly funding them from your state dollars, it will, unless more money is put into the state revenue, more state revenue goes to the education program, it will affect the school district's budget.
Great, thank you so much. There's a question about the breakdown in cost of EO versus UA. And those are the two different types of scholarships, correct? Unique ability and.
That's correct. There's for students with unique abilities, there are adjustments so that to provide the resources for whatever their disability is, which is so they're higher on average than those in the FES-EO. But we were trying to be as conservative as possible in these estimates, and we use the FES-EO average per pupil expenditure in these calculations.
Well, it actually, and this is one of the issues with the way the Florida Department of Education releases the budget data is there's one line item for FES. And so we don't actually get a breakdown of how much is spent on one versus the other right now for each school district. So that is why most of the information that we're putting out is FES as a standalone thing, including both the two different options. And then, so the cost is average. So the $8,515 is the per pupil rate that average for the state that is going per pupil to vouchers, but it would be higher for the special education students and tends to be a bit lower for the regular. But most of the students participating now are on the EO side.
And if you look at the Step Up for Students, which is a scholarship organization, they reported this year that the average scholarship for kids with unique abilities is a little over $10,000. Sorry, I misspoke.
Great, thank you both so much. And just a heads up, we do have a lot of questions in the queue. So we're going to try to answer the ones we can. Some of them we're just going to type the answer in. Some of them we are going to answer live, but we will get through as many as we can in this short period of time. So question on the percentage of voucher money currently going to religious schools, and would HB1 change that? Now, I know from a report that FPI and ELC put out on the current voucher program, we did have an estimate of what percent of state school aid was going to private education under the voucher program. I don't know if we have the percentage of voucher money going to private religious schools.
No, we don't have, that's not something that is provided in the data.
Okay. Will money follow back to districts if students return to public schools?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, the amount of money that a school district gets is calculated every year based on their enrollment. So if their enrollment increases, they would get more funds. Right now, the voucher students are counted. But since now we're talking about something that would expand to a bunch of students that are not included in the enrollment counts, then the expense is going to be a good deal higher.
and it also depends on when the calculations are counted. And there's been some talk, well, maybe there should be more head counts so that, you know, those funds could be more quickly recouped in that case. But anyways, that's probably too far down the rabbit hole.
Great. Thank you both. This is a good kind of follow-up question. What happens to voucher funding that goes unused? Does the state keep the money?
Under HB1, yes, the state would get the money in the cases of like you know, malfeasance or something like that the parent has to do something bad. But in HB1, if there are unexpended funds at the end of the year and the family is still eligible, they don't return that money. That's my read.
I think it had a cap of like $50,000
For the UA
the account.
students, and
Oh,
about
that was
that for
specific.
the
Okay.
yeah, there's one cap for the EO and one for the unique abilities.
Great. Thank you so much. With the district by district breakdown, do you see any correlations regarding racial demographics and how much districts would lose? Would areas with large communities of color be more impacted than others?
That's not something that we've looked at yet. I think it really depends on the size of the private school and homeschool population right now. So that would be something to, you know, if you look at the specific district and see if it is a larger percent of their state aid or not, you can get a sense, but we haven't looked specifically at that right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to take about 5 more minutes of questions, and the ones we don't get to, we will try to follow up as best we can via email. So there's a question about, is there precedence for this in other states? And I know that Arizona is one example, and that was touched on a little bit in the analysis that came out today.
Yes, and Mary said earlier, I mean, it's very early days. It's only been this school year, and not even from the beginning of the school year. But the legislative analysis, the budget analysis, they had projected, I think it was $30 million to cover vouchers. It's in excess of 300 million at this point that they did not anticipate losing from coming from their budget. So the impact has been quite substantial. And we could, share contacts with folks in Arizona. If you want to follow up by email, we can share those with you.
Great, thank you so much. For clarity, is your analysis based upon the FES part of the expansion since it's already funded with state dollars?
That's right. We did not investigate the Florida tax credit, but the eligibility for the Florida tax credit aligns with is the same as the FES empowerment or education opportunities. program, but we may yet, but so far we've been focused on the money coming directly from general revenue and school district budgets going to private schools.
Great, thank you. Are any provision for requiring participating entities or individuals to comply with the state accountability system?
There is a provision for testing. It does not have to be part of the state system. Students can sit for approved norm reference tests. There's a list of those on the Department of Education's website that students can take.
Great, thank you. And so, you know, there's a few questions asking about the likelihood of this passing, a few expressing concerns about the legislation and what can be done to help oppose it. We also have a comment that this feels a bit like a fight has been set up between those of us who care about public education and communities of faith who stand to benefit from the expansion. You know, in terms of disseminating this information, we would say, you know, it's important that folks are aware of exactly the impact this bill would have, which is why we are putting out this fiscal analysis. You know, it would be very much put school districts at risk and divert even more state school aid funding away from public schools.
Well, I don't think communities of faith are a monolith. Definitely we have pastors for Florida's Children and the Florida Council of Churches who are working as part of a coalition with us on this bill. So I don't think it's trying to pit public education against faith communities. You would need to take that up with, you know, the faith community that you are engaged with and on that issue.
And I think in general, what we're trying to do is just, these are estimates. It may be much higher. We're just trying to like give some information so that people can say, wait, before this gets rushed through, like, let's stop and look at what we actually could be doing to our state funds and our education funds, and how this could really cause some huge trouble down the line with having to come up with all these dollars that are not being accounted for. And so I think right now people aren't aware of how this could impact. The reports I've seen are saying, oh, this isn't going to affect the public schools at all, kind of. And that's just not true by any read on the legislation that we've been really trying to make sure that we're not, you know, missing key points here. And we have all the information online of how we came about these estimates, where we got the information from. Like, these are solid projections that it's not looking good. And so I think just getting more people aware of what could potentially happen, and looking at Arizona is a great example, as other states are poised to do this. There are bills pending in other states as well. So just getting more information out there, I just think is critical right now.
And we know that the state of Florida, you know, believes in education and investing in this public good. And many communities around the state have invested their local dollars as well, whether it's in their property millage, whether it's a sales tax. So that goes specifically, is dedicated to some educational purpose, whether it's buildings or teacher salary or what have you. So we know there is a strong commitment to public education, and we don't feel like people have a good, like Mary said, aren't aware of this issue, and that these funds are being, you know, siphoned from public coffers.
Great, thank you both so much. There's still some questions in the queue. These are mostly clarification. So we will try to respond via email for some of these. We're going to wrap this up. As a reminder, you can access the estimates on Florida Policy Institute's homepage. We have also dropped links to the fiscal estimate and FPI and ELC's recent report on voucher expansion in both the chat and in Q&A. When we follow up later with a link to the recording in the slide deck, I will include those links again for folks who have missed them. So thank you everyone for joining us. Noreen and Mary, if you have any closing thoughts.
No, I just really want people to be aware of it. And because this is already moving through the legislature, that we take the time to have those conversations, whether it's school boards, legislators, whoever your elected official is, and let them know about the magnitude and the potential for harm. Not potential, we already know that, more than $1 billion is being diverted from public schools, and people just are not aware of that. So thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you everyone so much for attending, and please be on the lookout for the slide deck and a link to the recording later today. Bye, everyone.